Welcome to the 12-Step Recovery Evolution podcast. Visit recoveryevolution.co.uk for more episodes, helpful resources and links to our social media. Also visit the site for information on how you can attend a future Zoom session or workshop live. Thank you.
Good morning, folks. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see you all this morning. Some good news, some sad news, some poignant news. But I think it's always really important for us to have a proper check-in so that we can all share where we're at. I'm in a good place this morning. Like Val, I had a good night's sleep, so that's good. So today, Lester's asked me to share with you some thoughts and ideas around relationships. We kind of start off with our treatment beginning to understand that the major issue that we have is one of relationships. It's when we come into treatment, it's our relationship with drugs and alcohol, and then when we take that away, we start to realise that this issue with relationships goes a lot deeper, and that can be quite hard because initially we think that drugs and alcohol are the problem, and then we find out that there's all this other stuff, and that's the program is not about stopping drinking and using. The program is about improving our ability to relate. So I've obviously, not being in 12-step recovery and having a background in psychology and psychodynamics and psychoanalysis, a lot of the theories that I use, although they work absolutely alongside what we learn in the big book, they give us some other ideas and some other tools. So what I thought I'd do with you today is to share specifically one of those, and just to see whether any of you can relate to that, if it can be helpful. Now, those of you who've done some work with me before will have probably heard about this before. I mean, sort of the name of the talk today is Take the Drama Out of Your Relationships, and those who've worked with me before will know that I talk quite often about what we call the drama triangle. So hopefully today we'll unpick some of that and give you a bit more understanding of how that could be useful for you to try and make your relationships a bit more healthy. So this is just one theory, and it relates to, as I say, this idea of an unhealthy relationship. But I guess it's about what is an unhealthy relationship? When does the relationship become unhealthy? And we, I suppose, because all relationships are on a spectrum, we sometimes we'll have a good relationship, and then 10 minutes later we feel like we're in a bad relationship. These things are constantly changing. So, but what we're talking about when we're talking about a dysfunctional relationship or an unhealthy relationship is a relationship that's one that's really causing harm, and that might be causing harm to you. It could be causing harm to others, and that harm could be physical, could be emotional, could be spiritual, psychological, or financial. So really, when we're thinking about whether the relationships we have are healthy or not healthy, it's worth trying to think about all of those aspects. Lester often talks about dysfunction, and I know we use that word a lot. And I suppose I think it's quite important, again, for us to think about what do we actually mean by that. When we look at the dictionary definition, the definition of dysfunction is a failure to function in an expected manner. So if we think about that, if we think about a relationship with drugs and alcohol, we might say that the expected thing is that someone can go out for a drink, they can have 2 drinks, and then they can go home. That's how we would expect it. But we know that when we have a dysfunctional or unhealthy relationship with alcohol, that's not possible. We don't behave like people who society would expect you to behave. So it's about our relationships functioning in an expected manner, or another way of thinking is maybe if it's socially improper. So then we think about that dysfunction. Dysfunction's obviously got lots of levels as well. I mean, there's always going to be dysfunction, isn't there? We know, again, as I said, there's always going to be good days and bad days. But again, it's about thinking about another spectrum there. That dysfunction can be socially acceptable. It can be acceptable to have a fiery relationship, or some people choose to be married but live separately, or some people choose to be in polygamous relationships. There's all sorts of things that we can do which fall under kind of socially acceptable. But then we go through to sort of undesirable, and then at the other end we're right through to harmful. So again, what we're thinking about here is picking those up. I think Lester again often talks about that sense that we have very different relationships with very different people, and they can all be different and should all be different. So it's about thinking about the ones that have become harmful or undesirable. So I kind of want to put it back to you at this point. If you were trying to think about whether or not a relationship was undesirable or unhealthy or harmful, can you all, I don't know if any of you have got a pen and paper there, or if you want to put your hand up and then shout out. Fox, you're going to have to be all over this. What kind of words come to mind if we were trying to describe an unhealthy relationship?
Right. If you want to unmute yourselves, I'm going to throw in jealousy.
Ooh, lovely.
To mind.
Toxic.
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 Toxic, yeah.
Abusive.
Abusive.
Codependent.
Nice.
Controlling.
Yes.
Dishonest.
Domestic abuse.
Yes.
Emotional abuse.
Emotional, physical, psychological, sexual, coercive control.
Yes.
Crikey, Bal, you're on fire.
I do it for a living.
Obsessive.
Yes.
Manipulating.
That one.
Yes. Anybody got any more?
Constricting.
How might we feel if we were in one of those relationships?
Yes.
Resentful. Hurt.
Yeah.
Sad.
Angry.
Alone. Afraid.
Afraid.
Alone.
Yeah. Lonely. Yeah. Very much so.
Resentful.
Worthless, not loved.
Ooh, worthless, unloved.
Hopeless.
Not good enough.
Yeah.
A victim.
Nice. So I don't know if digging in and thinking about those words, I don't know if that's brought anything up for anyone. Has anybody got a sense of that they've been in a relationship that's made them feel like that?
Yep.
Definitely.
Nice one, Tracy. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about when I first meet you guys when you come into treatment. This is the relationship you have with your substance, isn't it? Codependent, toxic, dishonest, obsessive, manipulative, resentful, hurt, angry. So we kind of know already quite a lot about this stuff. So we know what an unhealthy, dysfunctional relationship feels like, what it sounds like, what it looks like. But I guess what we might wonder is why do we continue to tolerate being in those dysfunctional relationships? I don't know if anyone has a sense of why they might have stayed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Low self-esteem. No
Yeah.
self. If a man or a woman loved themselves truly, they wouldn't be in that toxic relationship. And I must have had incredibly low self-esteem to keep going back. But the good thing is I then take responsibility. So
the reason why we tolerate being in those relationships, it sounds to me like you're saying that, for instance, there's a low self-esteem. It could be we're in there to try and get something met. We're trying to get some needs
Yes,
met.
most definitely, yeah.
So basically, if we're really brutal about this, we might stay in an unhealthy relationship for selfish reasons.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe that's part of the reason why people don't, because people never understand why people stay in unhealthy relationships, do they? They never understand why, and whether that be with a substance, with a person, with an organisation. It's unfathomable. But I guess when we're in there, if we've got that need and we feel like we're getting it met, there's a massive payoff there to stay in there. Does anybody is that making any sense to anyone?
Yeah, completely.
Lots.
Yeah, totally makes sense, Ellie. The only thing I'd say is, and I wouldn't say this to somebody who's newly fleeing a relationship, to say you're selfish for staying in it.
Oh no, absolutely.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness me, no. I mean, we're this is stuff that's
It's later on, yeah.
We have to come to this a lot later.
Yeah, and I didn't come to that until I came to rehab, so I was 43.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean,
sorry, I was just going to say, I think we stay in those relationships as well because we're scared.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we'll come to a bit more of that. So if we think about these unhealthy relationships and who we are within those relationships, we can sort of think about it as role taking. And people tend to have a habitual role, and that might be the one that they took as a child. And I don't know if any of you have had a sense that you've ever had a role that like what you call a habitual, like it's an absolute default fallback when in pressure, when on the edge, when all else fails, it's where I go to. So like it might be the clown, might be the fixer, the peacekeeper. I don't know, is anybody getting any sense of that they've ever been given that sort of, it could be that you have always been the baby of the family, the one who's protected away from everything. Mummy's little helper is another big one. Don't worry, I'll do it, I'll fix it, it'll all be okay. And we may have taken those roles in good faith. It may have been that helped things to jolly along, that everything went along much more smoothly if we took our part. And as I said, when we're thinking about a spectrum, that's absolutely fine, but it's when things get stepped up, when things become really dysfunctional, when the pressure, when the stress is really on for whatever reason. And then we might really bed into that role. And the reason why we might do that is exactly what you were saying. It might be to get our needs met. So that might be care, security, attention. I mean, if we're in a volatile environment and we know that if we make everyone laugh, that kind of means that we get to have somewhere to sleep tonight. That could be a really good reason for us to stay in that role. So we start to realise that this is a bit like a game, and we take a part, and when we're in that game, we're trying to win, or at least to have an active role. And winning might just be being okay. It might just be keeping it on some sort of even keel. So I don't know if you guys want to have a think. I don't know if any of you have a sense that you've got a role that you take?
Yeah, Andy here.
Yeah, hi Andy.
I think it also depends because it sort of multi-role. Ones that you choose for yourself, and then ones that are imposed, like a conditioned response rather than a choice.
Okay, so which roles do you think you've chosen?
Definitely peacekeeper.
Right.
Often fixer.
Yeah.
But then it depends whether or not that's which relationship that's talking about, because a work environment is very different to a home environment.
Of course, because I'm guessing work environment may well be more functional.
No.
Well, maybe not in your case. Okay, so you might get apportioned a different role when you're at work to the one you get when you're at home. That makes huge sense, doesn't it? because we might have a different status in that environment. So what's the roles that you said you feel you sometimes have things inflicted on you?
I suppose it's the lack of choice. Expectation, duty, horrible word to use, but.
So so which role do you get? Is that what's given to you there with that stepping up and?
Yeah, well, that's more the work environment. I don't want to go bang on about work too much, but there is an expectation, and it's more than just a social expectation. There's an obligation.
Yeah. So there are lots of roles that we might take, and as you say, they could be consciously taken. So I know if I don't do this, I'm going to get it. They could be unconsciously taken. It feels good when I do this, and therefore it must be right. Or they could be forced upon us because we, as you say, we have a choice. So what about your other members of your family? Does you have a recognition if you had brothers and sisters or anyone like that there was maybe the older one and the younger one had different roles, or step brothers and sisters had different roles? Do people have, do you get a sense of, there maybe being a bossy one, or the one who was a parent's favourite, or is any of that ringing any bells of anyone?
Boys were always valued more than girls in my family.
There we go. Absolutely. So less than, if you're not a boy, you're less than. So you be sort of apportioned that role. And that's quite powerful, isn't it?
My sister was my mum. When my mum and dad separated, we both went to live with my dad, and my sister was able to go and live back with my mum, and I was begging and pleading, and I was never allowed to go and live back with my mum. And so I've always had that, she doesn't love me, I'm not good enough. I've carried that with me, really, and I've only just started to get better, I'd say, in the last 2 or 3 years. And I think
so that role
you were asking earlier, sorry, Eleanor, I think that I never had the courage to express my needs. That was my issue. That's one of my biggest issues in relationships, is I've never had the courage of being clear on what my needs are or how to express them. That's
definitely. When we don't know our own needs and we don't know how to express our own needs, we'll try and find a way to get them met, and we'll do that all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. And those weird and wonderful ways are what we call this game playing. Now, it was 40 years ago that a psychologist, Stephen Cartman, came up with this theory of the drama triangle. And as I say, those of you who have worked with me before will know that it's a bit of a go-to for me, because I think it's a really simple representation and a really easy way to get your head around just one of the parts of dysfunction. And it helps us to sort of make some sort of sense of the games that we do play in our relationships. Fox, I don't know if you've got the triangle that we could perhaps, oh, look at that. So can you all see that in front of you? There's a triangle there that shows in the 3 corners the 3 main roles that according to Cartman, this is what we do. This is one type of game that we play. But it feels, and the guys I've worked with, it feels like it's not uncommon, and it can be really helpful to understand about these 3 roles. So in an unhealthy relationship, we can cause drama by moving around these 3 positions. So if I go through the 3 positions to give you an idea of what we mean by them, and now before we start, obviously we can understand that there are actual victims in this world, and that's quite a genuine thing. We're not talking about actual, the noun victim. We're talking about the verb, I suppose, to be a victim. And the same with rescuer. We're not talking about firemen or people who genuinely come in and save the day. And the same with persecutors. We're not talking about someone whose job is to torture someone in the Middle East or whatever. These are just positions, these are roles, these are positions that we might take within a relationship. So let me just explain a bit about what I mean by that. So when we think about the victim, at the bottom there, you've got the position of the victim. Another way you might think about that might be child, but that can get a bit confusing. So if we stick with victim, the lines we might hear from the victim when they're in that role would be things like, it's not fair, or poor me. Now, when we're in the victim role, we can feel really powerless, helpless and hopeless. Now, it's really interesting because when we were giving out the words earlier about what it feels like to be in an unhealthy relationship, powerless was one of the words that came up. So we can understand that it's when we're in that position that feeling, that's the feeling that we have. So victims, when we're in a victim position, we might find it difficult to make decisions or solve problems. And we might find it hard to take responsibility for ourselves. Now, those of you who've been into treatment might remember that very much being the feeling that you had when you came into treatment. That feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, that inability to take responsibility for yourself. Not everyone who comes into treatment, it feels like that, but I know that is a time when we often see people take that position, they take that role. It's not fair, I can't cope, poor me. And so we all know that that's kind of a sort of a pre-rock bottom feeling, I guess. But to stay in the victim position, you need a persecutor. So that's someone who keeps us down. So those of us who like to stay in the victim position will always look for a persecutor, and that might be a person or it might be an organisation. And that can be someone who we can sort of blame for keeping us there. So that could be that we get stuck in some stuff around our parents. And again, we know that, Lester often talks to us about we having to get to a point where we can let that stuff go, where we can process it. It could be stuff around the government, it could be stuff around the police, it could be, no end of thing. They can keep us down, oh, well, I'll never get better, it will never happen for me, because we find it easier to keep things away. So we know when we're in that position, that unhealthy position, when we hear ourselves saying things like, it's not fair, or poor me. If we go up to the right, you've got this other position of rescuer, and when we don't necessarily stay in that position of victim. There are times when we might move up to the rescuer's role. And now the rescuer is the saviour, the martyr. Let me help, or here, give it to me. So that might be what you might hear from the rescuer. They're classic enablers. So they keep the victim dependent. So the victim not only will need a persecutor to make them the victim, but they also need a rescuer to collude with them and to enable them. And we talk a lot about codependency, and that comes up a lot in treatment, and especially later on when we start to, as I say, unpick our unhealthy relationships. And this might be where two people or a person or organisation or take those roles of rescuer and victim. And obviously we see this a lot in addict relationships, where there's often an enabler and a victim to the disease, and they can keep each other, they can stay in there because they're not moving out of the triangle. And we also can see that between like the vulnerable and the welfare state. So if I'm continually being put in a position where I feel like I owe something to someone, where I'm only valid because someone's rescuing me, I'm only valid because somebody's paying, giving me handouts, it might be that I could get very, very caught in that position, and that's a really dangerous place to get to. So we need to listen out for that stuff. We need to listen out for that poor me stuff. And then finally in the top left, we've got the position of the persecutor. So that's when we're feeling very judgmental, and that's all about blame and shame. It's your fault. So the persecutor will act very superior, particularly to their victim. They will justify their ruthlessness. They'll say things like, well, you've got to be ruthless in this world, if you're going to get on, if you're going to survive. So there's a lot of justification around staying in the persecutor position. And the persecutor will be definitely keeping all the blame out, keeping it all on everybody else, and all the judgment all on everyone else. So this stuff's quite it's quite difficult to acknowledge when we do act in these ways. I don't know if anybody's recognizing themselves in any of these positions, or recognizing a time when they might have moved around any of these positions. Has anybody got anything they want to share with us?
Eleanor, can I bring something up which was interesting?
Definitely.
So outside of in this relationship here, my youngest daughter is always, she is a persecutor with me. Do you know what I mean? I mean, clearly she was a victim along the lines where I was in my alcoholism and everything. But, you know, she's very judgmental with me. This is what I think, you know, that's the way it should be done. And she justifies it all the time. I find it very difficult to manage that, because I don't know how to respond.
And as you say, she'll be, and that's what happens, victim and persecutor move between those two positions, Tracy. But they're both unhealthy, but they're both the two positions they swing between. And what we'll come to is that sense that only one person can't play the game on their own. If the other person, you know, if you're playing cards and one person puts the cards down, says not playing anymore, the game's over. Now that person might take a while. They might chuck the cards. They might, you know, please play, please, you know, come on, you bastard, you let me, you know, you owe it to all that. People will try anything to get you back in the game. But if we stop playing the game's over. And I mean, obviously at this point, I'm trying to just get us to recognise when we're in the game, but you can see it. You can see that there's a game going on. And I'm wondering which role you find yourself going into.
How about rescuer?
That's what I'm wondering. When she's happy,
oh, sorry. Go on. When you finish.
So one of the issues I've got with her, if I give you a main issue to work around it, it's like the other day she phoned up and I said, "Oh look, I'm sorry, I'm in a meeting." And I go, "Oh, you're always on a bloody meeting, bloody meetings." And then we had a talk about it the other day, and I said to her, "Look, you know, I really need to do them. You know, this is what's going to help me to get better." You know, I mean, she's 29, so I'm not talking to an 11-year-old here. That's the other thing. I need to talk to her like an adult. She's always said, you know, I'm grown up. Don't start telling me what to do. But she said to me the other day, you're putting your meetings above everything, every relationship you've got. So I could see what she's trying to say to me, and we had a good call out the back of it. But that's her main issue. It's like I've always shelved her, haven't I? I shelved her for alcohol, and now I'm shelving her for my recovery. When I can get where she's coming from.
I was going to say, you know, there are some healthy times when we are being victimised, when we do need to rescue, and when we do need to make a judgment. Though there are times when that is quite relevant, but it's about how we respond to that, isn't it? I guess. So it sounds like, I mean, I can hear that's quite a bit of victim speak from her, isn't it? You're never there for me.
Well, certainly that's what was there as all her childhood.
And a rescuer would say, "Okay, don't worry, I won't use my meetings again. If you ever ring me again when the meeting's on, I'll shut the meeting off." Do you see what I mean? That's when you would then be taking the rescuing role. What it sounds like you're trying to do is to stay in a very adult position. Actually, just explain, "I'm not choosing this over you. I'm choosing this for you."
Well, I said to her the other day, you know, I know when my meetings are, so you know, maybe it'd be a good idea if I give you an idea of when those meetings are, so you know when it's a good time if you need to call me. Obviously, if it's something really urgent, of course I'll answer the phone, text me, but trying to give her some, so that I'm showing some management around it for her.
Exactly. So that's how we would deal with a colleague. That's a perfectly adult, healthy response. Nice. Anybody else got anything? John, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I was just thinking about. I was thinking I can relate to that in external relationships, but I can also relate to it, like with myself.
Yes, absolutely.
My own persecutor, which then puts me into victim. I just go round and round and round with myself. Do you know what I mean? Just made me think about that. That's all. I just thought I'd share that Thank you.
I know that's absolutely spot on, John. Absolutely. Yeah, we play we can, I guess, as you say, we can play these games alone, but that's internally. So why do we do it? Why do we keep playing, taking these roles? You know, theorists suggest it's got a lot to do with control. If I'm in the victim position, I don't have to take responsibility for myself. I can control, make sure other people come and look after me. I mean, we know it doesn't work, but that's the feeling we might be getting. So the victim might be getting some care and attention that they may not have received perhaps as a child. They might still be craving that in a sort of perverse way. But so we might get that payoff. So it might feel like, again, you know, oh, leave me alone, it's not fair, don't keep asking me to take responsibility. You know, that feels like we're getting something from that. But ultimately, what happens is we feel, and it's exactly what we were saying at the beginning, we end up feeling just powerless and helpless all over again. And we would suspect that we might have a tendency, when under pressure and in stressful situations, of going into the victim position where we have suffered some sort of deprivation. So it's, you know, it's a bit like Val was saying earlier, you know, this stuff is really uncomfortable and we have to handle it really sensitively. But I suppose when we're working in the rehab, at that point, we're kind of dealing with life and death, aren't we? And I'm afraid sometimes that's when it's important for us to take on a functional sort of persecutory role as such, and to force people to pull out of these positions. So why would we stay in rescuer? Why would someone continue to sort of put themselves in that martyr position? I mean, we would understand it might be to avert attention away from their own pain. We often see that, don't we? Where we're in treatment and somebody's running around looking after everybody else. They're not having to really look inside themselves, again, at that painful stuff. They might also be getting quite a lot of adoration, and people might be saying, well done, and people might be looking at them. They imagine everybody's admiring them and praising them for being such a kind person. And that might be something that they've been craving for a long time. But I think more than anything else is a sense with the rescuer that they want to become indispensable. They don't want the victims to be able to manage without them. Because if the victim can manage without them, they might be left alone. They might be left. So we might see that coming from somewhere where perhaps someone's had a background of chaos, where they haven't been able to rely on knowing if people would be around for them or not. So this might be, like you say, this little fixer, this helper might be someone who come. I think I've just seen Val's put me. They want to feel needed. Absolutely, absolutely. They want people, you know, we might just want to feel needed, because if we feel needed, we kind of, there's a payoff from that is that people will keep coming back. They don't leave us, won't leave us alone. But what happens? What happens in reality is that the rescuer becomes burnt out. They become burnt out and they become resentful. So then pretty soon they become the persecutor or the victim themselves. So then thinking about the persecutor, why might I stay in that persecutor position? Well, again, it's about control. I'm so petrified, I want to keep control. And this will often be, we'll often find that people who've suffered quite a lot of abuse themselves may well take the persecutor role. And it's to avert blame away from themselves. But more than that, it's to avert shame away from themselves. So when we live with a lot of shame, it can be too overwhelming, it can be too painful, so we want to throw it onto someone else. So we might become very judgmental about other people. Oh, look at him, you know, look at you, you're rubbish, you're useless. It can help, we think it makes us feel better. But what happens when we're trying to build our self-esteem through being persecutory, and we're trying to feel powerful, so we get bossy and judgmental, what actually happens is we soon slip into the victim position, because when we behave like that, people don't react well to it, and then before we know it, we're feeling really sorry for ourselves again. Well, I told everyone not to do, and then I'm not doing it, and now I'm here and I'm doing it all myself. We go back down to victim, and then we feel powerless, and then the cycle starts all over again. So I think what I was hoping that we would get from thinking about those 3 positions today was to recognise just a tiny bit around what we might hear ourselves say when we're in either of those 3 positions. So when we're being victim, so it's not fair. When we're being the rescuer, oh, give it to me, I'll do it for you. Or when we're being the persecutor, it's your fault, you're wrong. We can start to recognise when we're slipping into those unhealthy dynamics. And as Tracy, put so nicely, she's saying, what's it like when we're on the receiving end of somebody who wants to be in one of those 3 positions? Well, the temptation when someone starts to play a game with me, when someone wants to dance with me, is for me to get in and dance with them. So if they want to have a go at me, then I want to go, oh, don't have a poor me. Oh, she's always having a go at me. Or if somebody comes along and says, oh, I haven't got a clue, I don't know what to do, I'm useless, I can't do it. There's a part of me that wants to jump and say, oh, come on, give it to me, I'll do it for you, because that makes me feel better. So I have to recognise that dialogue, because that's not the healthy response. And what it will do is it just bring me back round into one of those other positions. The trouble with playing this game is there's 3 positions, and you'll end up in one of them. While you're still playing the game, you're still in the drama. So what we want is we want healthy relationships. So I suppose what would be really nice to do now would be to think about the words we might use to describe a healthy relationship. So I don't know, Foxy, if we can open everyone's mics again and we can just grab some words that might describe a healthy relationship.
Bit where he was at the start, but then he changed the more he talked to me.
Yeah, you kind of. What can you bring to
Everybody's unmuted.
rather than what you can get?
Thanks, Fox.
To feel love.
Love?
Okay, I need it.
Honest.
You want to talk?
I've just muted everybody. I think it's probably best if you unmute yourselves, because obviously people are having conversations that we shouldn't hear. So if you want to unmute yourselves and call it out.
Ellen, I think the healthy relationship is like having a balanced relationship and thinking, what can I bring to this person's life? What can I add to this person's life? Rather than going in and saying, what can I get from this person?
Oh, hang on. Eleanor, sorry, you were on mute as well. Bear with me. There we go. Sorry.
So I'm just going to say I picked up security and love from the chat.
Equality, trust.
Lovely.
Respect.
Balance.
Acceptance.
Acceptance.
We want to feel accepted, unconditionally in my case.
And what about what Lester was saying yesterday about asking for what I deserve? And we were saying, weren't we, yesterday, that where we have low self-esteem, we don't ask for very much. So we have quite a low standard for what we'll accept. So we'll accept an imbalanced relationship. We might accept a relationship where there's no trust. We might accept a relationship that's not equal if we have low self-esteem. So we can work that both ways. We can notice if we're in a lot of unhealthy relationships that maybe we have a self-esteem issue, and we can work on that. Or if we know that we struggle with our own self-love and self-esteem, we can start to consciously raise our standard for what we'll accept from others. So yeah, I've got some nice ones here. Honesty, sharing, acceptance, supportive, selfless. Everyone can see the chat. There's some good stuff coming up here. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about not getting into these destructive games. and about holding our standards up where they need to be in order for us to increase our self-esteem. So I think what I'd like to do just before I finish, yeah, thanks, Sonia. What can I give rather than take? Absolutely. So what I'd like to do just before I finish is just to have a think about those three roles, victim, rescuer, and persecutor, and what we might do with them. And this might help with sort of what Tracy was talking about, this sense of when I get into a conversation with someone who's taking one of those roles, where can I go with that? So if we think about a victim's role, how can we make that victim role more healthy? Well, the ideal task would be to turn that, to cross that word victim out and change that to creator. So when I'm in that position where, you know, I'm feeling like things need to change for me, then I need to be able to problem solve. I need to be a creator. I need to be able to come up with ways to get out of it. So when we are faced with a victim, if we, rather than take the rescuer's role, we take the role of coach, we change that word rescuer to the word coach, and we start to ask questions of the victim. What needs do you think you need? You know, what's going on for you? What do you need to change? What can we do to help? What do you need? Do you need to know when my meetings are? You know, do you need to know where I'm going and what time I'm coming back? Whatever it might be, ask some questions. Switch yourself from being a rescuer who says, give it to me, I'll fix it, to being a coach, asking questions, helping that person to learn to be a problem solver. But then, as I say, we come to the role of the persecutor. That we could change to challenger. And when I think about the challenger, I think about people like Sonia and Jason and Lester. They're the people that force the creator to focus on their needs. You can still be that strong element in someone's life. You can still be that parental strength. But rather than being critical and judgmental and blaming, what you can be is someone who encourages and forces that change, forces the focus so that the victim can become the creator. So in that way, we can retain the roles that we like. So I like to help, or I like being helped, or I like to be quite powerful in my relationships. But we can exactly what Sonia said. We can think about what can I give to that other person rather than what can I take. So those of you who came up with an idea of what role you may have taken in the past, I wonder if that gives you a sense of what you could maybe adjust it into. So for the person who often feels like they're quite let down and left out and quite deprived, maybe they can see that by listening to people who can coach them, seeking out that kind of support, being around powerful people who can show them how to become problem solvers. It could be really, really, they can, without changing themselves completely, they can become creators and become problem solvers. And for those of you who I love helping people, you know, switch it round. Don't answer the questions, start asking the questions. And for those of you who feel quite like you've always taken that quite dominant role, that quite judgmental role, use that for good, use that force for good. Support those victims into making those changes. So that kind of wraps up the drama triangle, and hopefully gives us some food for thought around how to take the drama out of our relationships. I suppose now we've got a bit of time for anyone who wants to bring anything. I know there were some questions before that people wanted to ask, and there's no doubt some stuff people might want to feed back and some general stuff. So I don't know if anyone's got their hand up or anybody's got anything they want to check out. I don't know, Fox, have we got anybody wanting to speak?
We've got John.
Does that mean I can go?
There you go, John, you have to unmute yourself. There we go.
Hello. Hi, Eleanor.
Hello.
You're right. Yeah, so I just wanted to just go back to the three roles. So would you say that they're basically dysfunctional traits that is like it's a defense mechanism that we use maybe unconsciously, reliving past experiences that we know.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, and
it might be because Amber's just asked if we can have a think about how we might put that in the perspective of the parent-child dynamic. The traditional, and please nobody get offended by the genders here, because this is just the way we might think about it to keep it simple. And that is that we might think of the victim as being the child, the persecutor as being the father, and the rescuer as being the mother. And another way of looking at that might be the critical parent, the nurturing parent, and the child. And often we find that the father is actually the nurturing parent, or the parents switch position quite often. But also as a child, we might only have one parent, we might have no parents, we might be being brought up by a group of people, and we might well take another role. It might be that as a child we took the role of the nurturing parent. It might be that as a child we had to be the rescuer, we had to look after brothers and sisters, we might have to looked after a mum who wasn't well. It might be that we had to look after ourselves. It could be that as a child we became the persecutor, we had to try and run the show. We became very angry and very judgmental, and we became very powerful because we were so weak that we had to become quite angry and quite strong, quite powerful in order to stay safe. So when we feel under pressure, when we feel stressed, it's very easy to slip back into these positions. And what we need to do when we grow up is to say, okay, now it's time for me to step out of the triangle and just become an adult. And I often say to people, if you're trying to think about how to break the cycle, so if someone is it might be that if when every time someone's critical of me, I take a victim position, then that's going to happen to me every time I hear somebody say anything vaguely critical. So it might just be like, oh, nice of you to join us. Oh, bloody hell, just because I couldn't park and I didn't know where, and my alarm didn't go off. That would be an example of somebody taking the victim position on the assumption that the other person's being critical. So what we need to do is we need to stop listening to those internal voices, like John was saying, that internal stuff that's going on all the time. We need to stay in that adult position and own ourselves and say, if you want to talk to me like that, that's absolutely fine. But I'm not going to slip into one of those other positions. So we might think about the way we might talk to just someone who we come across on a normal day-to-day. And I often say to people who are working with me and I'm their therapist, is say, how can I have a healthy conversation with my partner? It always ends up getting really dramatic. And I say to them, how about you talk to them the way you talk to me? How would you explain it to me? Explain it to them the way you would explain it to me, because we talk like two adults. So that's kind of the way of taking the drama out of the relationship. Is there anything else that I am just trying to see if I can find anything on the chat that I might need to so that I know to be true.
Jody has a hand up as well. Jody, you're good to go.
Yeah, I think thank you first, but I think so for me, these kind of meetings the last couple of days have made me feel really emotional about them. I think for me, the feeling when everyone was saying how they felt in unhealthy relationships, I think for me in a way the reason I always stayed in them is I feel like I've gone through my entire life being extremely, extremely desperate. Desperate to either feel wanted or desperate to please people, but just pure desperation. And then, you know, with the alcohol, it was a desperation to just completely blank out the way that I felt. But then even like the word that come to my mind when you said about what's a healthy relationship was kind of to be wanted, which in itself probably isn't really that healthy, is it? Just to feel wanted.
I guess it's that's quite indicative. It tells us quite a bit about where you're at, though, doesn't it? About how you're feeling internally. You're feeling unwanted. That's how you're feeling, which is why you want to be wanted. But that's not a kind of that's quite a low place to be starting from, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what we would understand from that is, if we were in a healthy relationship, we would know we're wanted because that person's having a healthy relationship with us. We don't need to be shown that we're wanted. Does that make any sense? So what we might notice there, Jodie, is that's the work that you're going to do. You're going to bring your self-esteem up to a point where you know that you're good enough to be wanted. You don't, does it mean? It's going to be about then you setting the standard for what you will put up with, what you want in your life. And as I said earlier, we can do it one of two ways. We can either do it by bringing up our self-esteem and then going out and with our new set of boundaries, or we can set our boundaries and then our self-esteem will come.
Yeah.
But it's a very painful place, isn't it, when we feel very unlovable, very unwanted, and yet we're keeping away all those unhealthy possibilities.
Yeah.
It's a very lonely place.
Yeah, and it has become like a lifelong sort of comfort zone for me. So in a weird way, I think that's why I do tend to stay in the victim role, I guess, because, you know, it leads.
You keep the persecutors keep coming in then, don't they?
Yeah.
If you stay in victim, it's like a little flag for the persecutors. Because they're sort of, oh, there's one. So what we need to do is we need to shift your boundaries.
Yeah, definitely.
At the same time as working on your self-esteem. And that way you start to get what you deserve.
Yeah.
Here we go. Look, Jake's put a lovely message on here. I couldn't possibly start a new relationship until I start to love myself. Recovery has given me the opportunity to build a relationship with myself. That's kind of what we're talking about. But that's like one of those things. Jake's obviously, he's there. But I can sense from you, Jodie, you don't feel like you're there right now. So it's a bit, it's like that I hope Jeff's still there. I was like a name check for Jeff, his idea of the orangutans, where they're still holding on to the vine behind when they grasp for the vine in front. Never being prepared to let go and not be holding on to a vine. Because right now, what your recovery requires is for you to be alone in that sense. Yeah. Not in a codependent relationship, not in an unhealthy relationship. And that feels very uncomfortable because you're used to having something to hold on to, whether that's a bottle or a man or...
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. I think I'm going in the right direction, but slowly. Thank you.
You're welcome. So anybody else got anything they want to share with the group? You've all got, I'm sure, loads of wisdom around this stuff. Anything I've missed?
No hands up. Anybody got anything to say? So?
Hi, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Thank you. It's a bit embarrassing to admit it, but I find I know I am so codependent on my mum. So instead of feeling like a 46-year-old adult, I'm like a 46-year-old child. You know, I've even have thought at times, oh my God, when she's not here, I'm going to have to kill myself because I can't possibly live without her. I know that's mad, and I know I'm codependent on her, but I'm scared almost to not be. And she's not controlling. We have a close relationship, but I guess it's not healthy that I'm that dependent on her. But I'm kind of scared to not be like that, because will it seem like I don't love her as much if I don't still need her? Does that make sense?
Yes. Can you hear how you're trapped in that?
Not really.
Yeah, what I heard you saying was, I don't want to be this dependent, but I'm frightened if I'm not this dependent, she won't think I love her enough.
Right, okay.
And that sounds like a trap, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it's a bit like similar to what Jodie's saying, you know, I feel so alone and I feel so unloved. The last thing I want to do is be single. Because if I'm single, I'm alone and unloved. So this is all about letting go of the unhealthy stuff in order to allow the healthy stuff to come in. And what you will find is, if you continue to work on this stuff around your relationship with your mum, is that you and your mum will have a much healthier relationship.
Yeah, I'm
and
sure.
Actually what will happen is that the fear will fall away and you can really enjoy each other. There's nothing wrong. I mean, there are going to be moments when we become childlike with our parents, and there will also be times when we become childlike with a friend and childlike with a partner. Childlike, you know, our parents can be childlike with us sometimes, and that's all okay in the moment, and it's all okay in the, you know, during those. But when it becomes the normal, then we kind of know that's not going to be good for you. It's causing you fear now. It's causing you pain now.
Okay, thank you, Eleanor.
I think did Joe have a hand up?
Indeed. There you go, Joe.
It's Lawrence, actually, yeah.
Oh, Lawrence.
Hello.
Masquerade.
Oh, brilliant talk, by the way. It's great. It's making me think an awful lot. And I was just wondering, like, about, you know, like the triangle.
Yeah.
Okay, like, I'm trying to, you know, I want the answers for everything, don't I? So, like, Foxy's sharing the triangle, I think. But yeah, like the transitions between each thing, like.
I can't make it work.
I've been thinking about how I go from one to the other to the other.
Yep.
And like, for me, it seems to be that a lot of it is when I'm in my game and I'm playing my game, impatience and like that as soon as my impatience gets overwhelming, like I'll switch it up and then I'll become the next thing.
Yes. That's it. That's what we do in the games, isn't it? When we're not getting what we want, we switch it up. We see a toddler, the toddler who wants what they want. They'll start off with a please and then a little bit of a whine and then a whinge, and then they start to cry and then they start throwing things. Eventually they'll throw up. Because if we've got a good idea that we'll get what we want eventually, we'll keep trying.
See, as well, yeah, like when I'm, you know, getting into it with anyone, like with my brother and that, anyone, it's like I'll find that I'm the person I'm getting in with it with and myself are like one step behind each other. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it seems to go round to the left. It seems to go kind of clockwise most of the time. I mean, it could change, but the pattern I'm noticing is I'm going clockwise. And I was wondering, is it a bit, you know, like rock, paper, scissors?
Yeah.
Is it a bit like, well, this one's going to hit that one, and this one's going to hit that one?
Absolutely. Oh, we get very good. I mean, we get very good at playing these games. So you guys have been playing these games for years.
Mm.
You know, you get a family who sit down to play a game, a Monopoly or whatever, and they'll all, I'm always the dog, I'm always the hat, I always have Mayfair. You know, we know the games within our own families, and we know how to get in there.
Mm.
Absolutely. And what's going to change it is if you stop playing the game.
Yeah.
Easier said than done.
How's about if I had a particularly a relationship where I feel like I could say a lot of what I wanted to, yeah?
Yeah.
How, like, do you ever give tips of like a mutual coping strategy? If you can, like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like,
no, I'm not sure I get what you mean.
I don't necessarily think we've got time to cover that answer in the next 4 minutes.
Right, I might bug you later.
Yeah, you know where I am.
Yeah, all right.
Thanks, Lawrence. I do have Andy. He's going to be the last one for today.
Okay. Hi, Andy.
Hello. Just a quick thing that I've been working on that's working well for me. I thought I'd offer it up. I've been working on managing demand and expectation of not only of myself but of others.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that I was expecting far too much of everyone, including myself, and also not appropriating the correct value to the demands, the different demands that were being made.
Yeah, when we've been led, when we've taken on the idea, because we take it on, that our parents or whomever expect very high things from us, we become kind of overachieving, and we can also then become the other side, the flip side of that coin of this person who's desperately trying to do enough, is that they become very judgmental of people who aren't doing enough. Because we set standards very, very high, and then we then expect those same standards of everybody else. And it can be so painful, because not only are we failing to reach the standards we've set ourselves, but we're now hated by everybody because we're being so judgmental with them all, and they're all getting really annoyed with us. So it's a very, very lonely place, that, isn't it? So it's about being able to give ourselves a break and then giving other people a break too. Don't know if Andy's got any signal. He seems to have disappeared. Oh, you're back. Does that?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, piggybacking on the work Wi-Fi, it's rubbish. Yeah, no, that's very true. And thank you very much for today as well. And it's nice to see some old faces as well.
And you.